In this video, we're going to add some finishing touches to our Rotiform LHR custom rim in Fusion 360. Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in this video, we're going to get started adding the rest of the details to the center of the hub. Now, remember when we first looked at the Rotiform rims, there were a lot of different configuration options. We can have a center cap which hides all the lugs, and those can be used for those sort of arrow covers. We also can, we can configure a lot of different things about the way this looks. We are going to model it as it is inside of the image that we're using. We're going to have these little details. We're going to take care of the details for the lugs. And we want to make sure that we replicate these. And that's partially because these are challenging. And I want to make sure that we at least explore them. So the first thing that I want to identify or notice is that this feature appears to contain the underlying, or I guess in this case, the shape that it's cutting away. So that flat face or that conical face is carried into this. We can see the reflections and the way that it looks. So this to me tells me it's an offset cut. What I want to do is I want to explore how we can do that in Fusion 360. Then we're going to move on to these little dimples and also the lugs here. So let's bring back our hub solid body. And if you're following along, go ahead and continue to use your design. If you had any trouble, you can download this design from the description in the video. And we want to work, again, horizontally. We're going to just carry on because that's how we modeled all this other stuff. And we want to try to make this design, which will then be mirrored and patterned. So let's start a new sketch. Remember, we can hold down the left mouse button to select the YZ plane, as long as it's under our cursor. And again, I'm going to start with a line, a horizontal construction line, and I'm just going to bring it out here, hit escape, and then turn that to construction. So this is going to give me sort of a reference point. Now remember, we are going to just model one side of this, and we need to sort of be aware, of where these are falling in the design. So I'm going to use P on the keyboard, and I'm going to project just this point. And then I'm going to use P on the keyboard, and I want to project another point. So if I'm looking at this straight line, it looks like it intersects here. And if I carry this line out, it almost looks to me as if it's going to intersect here. So visually, those are 2 points that I want to use. Again, line, I'm going to carry a line down to here, and then I'm going to carry it over, say okay. I'm going to carry a line from here. I'm going to carry it over and say okay. These lines are going to be construction at this point, and these ones will actually be used for the design. Now, notice that it's not fixing an angle here, and that's intentional because we're only projecting a point. If we were going to carry it from some other detail, we would need another point of reference. So for example, if we use P on the keyboard and we turn this into construction, we can say that these two are tangent potentially, or we can say that they intersect. In this case, I'm not going to worry about it, but just note that if we were trying to drive this off of something else, we would need some additional references. I'm going to continue using lines to drive the shape, and that's simply because I think the rest of these are lines, and then this is a large arc back here. So now we're going to go to create arc, 3-point arc. We'll go between these two. We're going to go from here to here, and we'll go from here to here. I'm going to try to add tangency to everything. Make sure that this arc is tangent, and then this last one here. And that looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. I don't really care so much about the dimensions, but let's go ahead and let's just add a few. I'm just going to select things and add whatever dimension is coming up. And just to help me fully define this, I'm going to right click and make that an aligned dimension. I'm going to give this arc a value. And we also need to sort of figure out some positions, right? So this in relation to the origin, for example, and that'll fully define us. So the next thing that I want to do is I'm going to hide this LHR wheel. I'm going to try two different things. The first thing I want to try is extrude. Now the way that extrude works is going to be a little bit tricky, but note that under start, we can offset and we can also start from an object. Now, there is a difference between starting from an object and ending at an object. When I do this distance to object, what I want to do is I want to select this face right here, and I'm going to give it an offset value. I'm going to say 0.25. Let's try minus 0.25. And you can see that this isn't working. So let's reset this. Instead of object, let's do offset. And I'm going to say offset, let's say minus 2 inches and see where that puts us. So it's going down. So let's say positive 2 inches. That puts us in the middle of the rim. So I'm going to say 3 inches. That puts us above the rim. Okay. Then next I'm going to say to object. I'm going to select this entire object as the body. And then you can see it's got this minus 0.25. So now what we're doing is we're cutting into it. We're offsetting from the shape of the rim, and that's giving us the final cut that we're looking for. When I say minus 0.125, you can see that offset for some reason goes quite a bit deeper. I don't really know why that is. It shouldn't really be going that far, but let's try a smaller value. So the reason that this can get a little tricky is because sometimes it wants to go through the entire body. So you have to be real careful about how much we're taking away. That looks pretty good. I might increase it a little bit. Let's maybe take it to 0.1. And if we want, we can try to add a taper angle, let's say 5 degrees. You can see that completely does away with it. 1 degree doesn't work. Let's try -1. You can see that it's not really liking a taper angle. So let's leave it at 0. Let's say okay. So now that we've cut that out, let's try to add a fillet to this bottom edge. Now remember, we cut down 0.1. If we go all the way to 0.1, you can see that it fails. If we try to do half of that, 0.05, then we get that sort of rounded shape. I'm going to hold Control, again, Command if you're on a Mac, and I'm going to add it to the upper edge as well. So that gets us pretty close to the shape that we're looking for. It's not perfect, but it does get us pretty close. So now that we have that, we're going to go to Create and Mirror. We want to select Features. We're going to try Features first. If Features doesn't ever work, you can always try to use Faces. It's usually a little bit more robust. And then for the mirror plane, I'm going to hold down the left mouse button over these planes, and I want to select my XY plane. So now that I have that on both sides, I can go to Create, Pattern, and Circular Pattern. I'm going to select Features, which will be the original extrude, the fillets, and the mirror. The axis of revolution, again, I'm going to select a cylindrical edge on my part, and this time it's only going to be 4. Now remember, on the picture, if we bring that back, we've only got 4 of those things. And again, this is going to be a 4-lug design, 4 lugs. We're going to say okay, allow it to adjust and see what it looks like. So that looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with those results. If we use Control or Command 4 to turn off the edges, that's what I would expect to see. You can see the shading and the shadowing, the lighting effects carrying on because we just recessed what was there. So that end result looks pretty good. There's a few more things that we have to add. We have to add the dimples. We have to add the text in the center, which in reality, this is a separate center cap, but all I'm going to do, because this is really just for visual reference, is I'm going to cut that away just from what we have here. Unfortunately, that is not a text that we're probably going to find. We're going to have to sketch that. We could also use a decal. I mean, that is possible for us to just apply a decal over it. So that might be a good option as well. But next, we're going to try to take care of the dimple, and we want to take care of the lugs themselves. So when we're taking a look at this process, we have to think about the size of the lugs, whether or not we're going to add the detail of the lugs being their own body, if they're going to be just part of this design. And in this case, I'm going to draw the lugs separately, and I want to try to capture that detail. We don't really have all of the detail, but I want to start from the back side for the lugs. So I'm going to create a sketch, I'm going to bring back this, and I'm going to start with a circle. Now, in my design, it's a 12 millimeter lug that goes through here. And then we need to be mindful of the size of this, the pattern, right? So C on the keyboard for circle. I'm going to go and snap to the center of that. I'm going to turn the circle into construction. Then I'm going to give it a diameter value. Now remember, mine was 4 by 114.3 millimeters. And that's going to give us the center of the lug, 114.3. And then we need to figure out this angle. So again, L on the keyboard. I'm going to just make some reference lines, turn them into construction. So X on the keyboard, and then dimension the angle between them. In my case, it's going to be 45 degrees. So you can see it doesn't perfectly line up with the image that we have, which is why we want to do this part first. So we're going to finish the sketch. We're going to extrude that. We're going to go all the way through. So the distance will be through all. Again, objects to cut, make sure it's just the hub. And we'll say OK. We could sketch all of that at once, but we're going to be patterning it. So I'm really only focused on one for right now. So now that we have an accurate location for the lug itself, we can get a better location of where the dimples are and the rest of these features. So let's create a new sketch. Hold down the left mouse button, make sure that we're using a plane. We don't accidentally want to try to sketch on part of the body unless there's a good reason for it. So now I'm going to use P on the keyboard. I'm going to go back to the sketch. I'm going to use P to just project that point. Hide that sketch. Notice that I haven't been naming the last couple. We certainly should go back and name them, but at this point, let's just go ahead and speed through the rest of the design. So I'm going to use C on the keyboard, and I'm going to start because the bottom of this looks like a circular reference. So I want to pick some value that seems like it would be right. I'm going to do 1.25 inches. And then I'm going to use L on the keyboard as a line tool, which is going to come out, and then it's going to come up, and then come back down, come back over to this. Now, when we're doing this, there's a couple things that we need to keep in mind. We're not going to be able to match the image because obviously it's twisted or rotated just a little bit based on our sketch. We're using all of our coordinate systems, but the image has perspective. It was taken by a camera. It's not a true orthographic picture. So we're going to have to make some adjustments here. But there are a few things that we do know. We do know that this is going to intersect directly with the center. Right now it's giving it in this case, it's actually got the perpendicular constraint applied. So I'm going to delete that because I don't think there's a 90-degree angle there. But I do want a line to come from here through this point. I'm going to make that construction. And while that line is still selected, I'm going to go to coincident and select the origin. Now what that means is this line, if projected all the way, would hit that point. That means that now I can move this in and out. It's going to be exactly in between these two because of the number of things that we patterned. And you'll notice that it should theoretically hit them at the same time, but these lines right here are not actually the same. So the way that I want to do this is I either want to mirror it or I want to begin applying some equal constraints. So making these two lines the same, making these two lines the same, and then also making these tangent with this circle. Now when I make all those things the same, equal and tangent, and I begin moving this around, now you can see that as soon as it starts to hit this edge, it starts to hit this edge. And you'll notice that they're almost automatically parallel or pretty close to it. So I'm going to try to use these relationships. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to use P on the keyboard. I'm going to bring both of these in just in case. And then I'm going to make these construction, hitting X on the keyboard. And then I want to use a parallel constraint between these two. I shouldn't need to over here because they're equal, but I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then over here, this looks somewhat parallel to this edge. So P on the keyboard, I'm going to bring that over, select it, make it construction, and then again, parallel. I'm going to make this and this parallel. Now you'll notice in this case, it's not actually allowing me to do it. Now sometimes that will happen. Now sometimes it's because the geometry, sometimes it's because some other relationship. But if that doesn't allow you to project it, likely it's because it's no longer a line. Like this was pretty straightforward. this is going on a sloped face. So it's no longer a straight line when it's projected, it's some sort of polyline. And we can tell because the curvature combs display has been shown. When we select a line, we don't get that. So it's not going to let me do that, but that's okay. We can still get pretty close. So I'm going to just visually get it kind of close, maybe pull this down a little bit, and then I can start to dimension some of this to get relatively close. That looks okay. I'm going to give this a dimension. I'm going to do aligned. You can't see it because of the dark image, but we'll do that. All right, at this point, we do need to add some fillets in here. So I'm going to go to my fillet tool. I'm going to add a fillet between these two lines. I'm going to add one between these two and between these two. Now this is going to really break things. And that's because we had a lot of equal constraints. We had some relationships that we were trying to follow. But now we can go back and we can make this parallel, and that'll help that out. This one, you can see that this is sort of defined because of its dimension. So I'm going to take this line, and I'm going to make them equal. And that'll get me back to that fully dimensioned state. So the next thing that we need to think about is what this actually looks like. And this is kind of a tough one because it's hard to see. But if we hide the body, you can kind of see there's a little flat section in here. It almost appears as if this geometry was offset similar to this, but then a cylinder, like this circle right here, was cut out of the center part of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that outside profile. Remember that this is tangent here and this is tangent here, so we'll have that nice smooth interaction. But I'm going to take this entire profile and I'm going to use that same method as I did before where I offset it. So let's bring the hub back. Let's use extrude. I want to bring this entire profile, the whole thing. I'm going to offset it. Remember, we used 3 inches before, so that'll get me completely above. And then the distance is going to be to object. Remember, we don't want to select a single face. We want to try to get to a position where we're selecting the entire body. And then this time I'm going to offset it 0.125. Now you'll notice it's not really giving me anything. So let's try minus 0.125. And you can see it's not giving me anything here. So let's try a little bit smaller. Let's try 0.1. When we view this from the right, we are able to actually see that this could work, but it's not actually giving us the cut that we needed. So instead of object, if we actually bring this down, you can see that we are able to cut into the solid body. So we do have a valid sketch. So depending on how much time you want to spend making this as realistic as possible, it doesn't seem like this offset option is going to work because the to object reference isn't going to work. So what we could do is we could try to select a specific face, or we can come in and we can use another technique. And the other technique is going to be to split the body or to split the face. So I'm going to try split face. Faces to split is going to be everything that our sketch overlaps. The tool is going to be this thing. But because I don't have tangency all the way through, it's not going to treat it as a valid sketch. So the way that we get around that is by going back to our sketch, and then we're going to use a modify tool called break. And we want to break this arc at the intersection on both sides. Then that arc is now in a couple pieces. So I'm going to hit X on the keyboard, turn those into construction. And then now if we come to split face, faces to split, again, everything this thing intersects. And then our splitting tool will be that sketch, and we'll say, okay. All right, so at this point, we've done quite a bit. We're not done yet, but let's go ahead and save. And that way, if anything happens, we can always go back. Now, since we're using a slightly different technique, I'm going to actually go ahead and just show a little bit more complex version of this. So it's not something that we necessarily have to do, but I will say that the extrude likely didn't work because we've already cut this hole in it. So the simple solution would be just to do that extrude before we cut the hole. Now, because we projected the center reference of the hole, we can't just simply go back and drag them before the other. So what I want to do is I want to show you a little bit more advanced technique of building out the geometry that we need with surfaces, so that way you can see that technique and understand it. And the way that we're going to do that is we're first going to go to Surface, Create, Offset, make sure we turn off Chain Selection, and just pick the faces that we want. So these are all the faces that we want to offset. And we could bring the center reference in if we wanted to. We don't necessarily need it. So I'm going to say OK. Then I'm going to hide the solid body. At this point, I'm just going to begin working on the surface body, but there is another reference that we do need actually. While I'm thinking about it, let's hide the canvas. Let's go to Create, Offset, grab the back, and we'll just make a 0 offset. Now the reason we did that is because now we know where the back face of that lug needs to go. And that's kind of important because that reference there is actually going to be used when we create it. So let's edit that second offset feature, and let's just grab the lug to go with it. So now we know what material we have, what we're working with. So the next step in this process is let's bring back Sketch 8 and let's create an extruded surface. So we're going to use this. I'm going to offset it. Remember that before what we were doing was we were potentially offsetting from an object. It's not going to work the same way as it did there. So you can see that it's not allowing me to offset it. But what I want to do is I'm going to offset this, let's say 2.75 inches, and then I want to begin dragging this down. Okay. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create that level that I want for where this surface is actually going to start. So when we view it from the side, in the picture of this, what we actually end up having is like a flat plane here, and it kind of disappears into the rest of the geometry. So we're going to say okay for that extrude. We're going to hide it temporarily, and let's go ahead and try to make an offset surface of this right here. We're going to bring this down and just sort of offset it. You'll notice at some point it disappears because of that fillet, and you'll notice that it's not really giving me exactly what I want. It's offsetting it based on the normal direction of all these surfaces. So another trick that we can do is instead we can use Move Copy. We can copy this body. We're going to select Create Copy, and we're going to pull this straight down. And the reason that we're going to do this is because instead of that extrude on the side that we have, this piece right here, what we're doing now is we're representing that surface that we want, that sort of bottom face, and what we're building is the side wall of that surface. So we're going to say okay to that, and this top is going to completely go away. We don't need any of that. What we actually need is going to be this lower surface, which remember, this is the body that we're cutting away from, right? So what we need is this lower surface, and then we need it to come down, but we need it to transition into a cylinder that's larger than that, and that ends at a face that's planar to the bottom surface. I know it's kind of out there. It's probably not a good idea to try to get too deep into this, but essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to build all of the surfaces that we need. Thinking about this, I'm going to go back to this extrude, and I'm going to just make it longer in case we need it. There's no harm in having it longer because we're going to begin trimming it away. And we can sort of use this as the bottom face for where the cylinder needs to go. So the next two things we're going to do is we're going to go to Patch. We'll select the bottom face, and it's going to create a planar patch. Then I'm going to take this cylinder. I'm going to create an offset. And what I'm doing is I'm making a larger cylinder that's big enough for the lug itself. Now, if you'll remember, originally what we did was we had like a 1.25 inch radius or diameter cylinder. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get it pretty close. You notice that 0.4 is too big, 0.3 is too small, so we're going to go minus 0.375. You can see that gets us pretty close. We could use exact values, but this is going to work for us. Okay, so now there's a lot here, right? So we've got a bunch of different pieces to this. There are a couple ways that we can move forward from here. We can try to trim everything away as we need it, right? We don't need this top surface, but we can start to try to like trim stuff away. or we can try to use a tool called boundary fill. We can select all the tools that we have, which is sort of the inside and outside surfaces, the upper surface, this extrude, our offset on the bottom, this flat face here. And then what we're left with is going to be cells that we want to keep. Okay. Now this isn't perfect because we haven't completely explored this, but this tool, this boundary fill tool, lets us sort of build out all those regions and sort of figure out what's left behind. So I'm going to cancel that and I'm going to work with my just my surfaces for a little bit. And the reason that we're going to do that is because in order for boundary fill to work, we need this top piece as well. So let's try boundary fill one more time, and then we can decide if we want to go back and we want to use the other stuff. So let's try selecting all of these surfaces. So the outside, we need this inside piece. So I'm going to hold down the left mouse button. If we're having trouble, we can also go into the browser and select things there. We need the offset from the cylinder. Now you can see that we've sort of got this solid body. We need to select this inside cylinder as well. So let's select body 5. And you can see what we're left with. All these green areas are things that we can select to either keep or remove. So if we want to keep this, for example, and this piece, we're going to be left with a solid body that represents all of the combination of those areas. Now, this solid body isn't perfect because remember, what we actually want to do is we want it to dip down a little bit. So this tool it's kind of tricky to use because we have to go through the process of visualizing the entire thing as a culmination of all those bodies. If we're to do this with surfaces, what we need to start doing is using trim, and we're going to begin trimming away the stuff that we don't need. So for example, this outside cylinder, we want to trim away at this bottom piece here, right? This outside cylinder needs to come all the way through this surface and it needs to end at the bottom here. So we're going to start by trimming with that and we're going to get rid of the bottom. Okay. So now we can kind of see that we want that large area. Remember, all the stuff underneath here is going to be solid. We want that large area to carry all the way up through to the inside of this face. So if we trim again, we're going to use this as a trim tool and we're going to get rid of the inside. Now, if this doesn't work, sometimes it's the angle of what we're doing and the way that we're selecting stuff. So let's try it first. Let's use this as a trim tool and see if we can get rid of the top. And then let's hide, let's see, body 5, body 6. Let's get rid of those for right now. Let's try trim again. Now we want to use this as a trim tool and try to get rid of the inside. Now, sometimes when this doesn't work, it can become extremely frustrating, but we have another option that sometimes is easier, and that's split face. So the faces to split, we're going to grab all of these faces that we intersect, and the splitting tool is this cylinder. We're going to allow it to extend, and we'll say OK. Now, when we do that, what we're left with is this face here. Let's go ahead and hide everything else. This face where we can come in, select everything that we want to get rid of, and just hit delete. So sometimes using that as an option is a bit easier. The trim tool usually works. For example, we can get rid of that fairly easy. But sometimes when we have complex geometry, it just doesn't like it. All right. So the next thing we need to do is we need to get rid of this extruded surface below this face right here. So again, trim. Our trim tool is this, and the stuff we're going to remove is underneath here. And again, it doesn't like it. So sometimes if the intersection between those is exactly perfect, you actually have to go and use other tools or extend them. It really wants them to automatically extend through. I'm not really sure why. The splitting tool, we want to select the entire body, not a single face, and we want to allow it to extend. Okay, so once again, this body right here, let's go ahead and just hide everything else. This body, we want to remove everything that's on the bottom. So we're going to drag from the bottom over. Notice it's selecting the whole thing. Let's just manually work our way around, selecting all these little bits. And we can do it a little bit at a time. We don't have to grab everything at once, but we want to use delete on the keyboard to get rid of them. Okay. So now let's start bringing some of these bodies back, see what we're left with. Okay, so now I made a mistake and I got rid of the wrong section down here. This face right here really just needs to be on the inside. I can go back and I can figure out what I did wrong, or I can just continue moving forward. So what I want to do is I want to just build a planar patch inside of the cylinder, and then I need to trim it. So this is my trim tool, and I want to remove that little piece of the cylinder on the inside. Then I want to use that as my trim tool, and I want to get rid of this top piece here. Okay, so now we're building out the rest of that lug. Okay, everything in here now is ready to be stitched together as one. So we're going to use the stitch tool, grab all these little pieces, and what we should see is a green edge between everything that connects. So this body here is all one piece now. Now the reason that this is important, and actually I don't need this whole piece, I'm just going to delete that. The reason that this is important is now what we can do is we can stitch up the top of this. I'm just trying to see what other things we have that we don't need. So I want to get rid of that. I want to get rid of that. I'm going to right click and remove them. But now I'm going to patch the top of this, and I'm going to patch the bottom. Because when I stitch all this together, the bottom, this entire thing, and this top, what we've done is we've created a solid body. So if I bring the hub back, that solid body can be used in a combine. So in my solid tools, we're going to pattern, we're going to create a circular pattern of that body around the cylindrical face, and then we're going to use combine. We're going to use the cut. The target body is the main rim, and the tool bodies are all these little pieces that we created. So now when we say okay, what we've done is we've removed that information. Now we could have done this at once. We could have added fillets. We could have repeated that. We could have mirrored the face. There's a whole other different methodologies that we could have done. But now we can come in and we can add fillets to these upper corners. I'm going to go ahead and grab all these edges. Let's say 0.05. We just add a fillet to that. We can try to fillet this, but it's not going to like it because of its proximity here. And that comes back to making that cylinder the right size. Honestly, for the level of detail that I need, I don't really care about that. If I want to fillet it, I just need to pick something that's small enough to give me the level of detail that I need. So again, holding down Control or Command if you want to select more edges. We'll say okay there. And then if I want to add one to the bottom, I'm going to go ahead and add one that's 0.05 down there again. So now we have a lot more detail in that area. If I rotate this around and if I hide the edges, you can see that's starting to look a little bit more like the images. It's not perfect because I don't really have great references for what that looks like, but that surfacing trick sometimes is helpful to building out each piece of that complex process. Now, you'll note that I ended up having to create a couple of extra surfaces. If I had been able to visualize that at the start, then boundary fill would have worked fine. Because sometimes it's hard with these complex shapes, or we're going to have like 10 surfaces combining to make some unique shape, because that's kind of difficult to do. Oftentimes, using that sort of stitch, trim, and patch method is probably a little bit easier to visualize. So the last thing that this really needs, or the last two things that this really needs, is going to be that little dimple and then the Rotiform logo in the center. I'm not really going to worry too much about the hardware, but we can draw some hardware and pattern it if we want. But I'm really just concerned about getting all these details to look right. So let's take care of this little dimple, and there's a couple ways that we can do this. We can do this with just a cylindrical extrude and a full round fillet, or we can draw a revolve cut if we had a plane that went right through where we wanted it, or we could use the create primitive sphere. We could put it at the right spot and we could remove it. So because we haven't really used primitives before, let's go ahead and try this. We need to have a plane or a planar face to sketch on, and because that's not a plane, I need to select a plane or a planar face. I'm just going to use that. I'm going to draw it here. I don't know what the radius needs to be. I can't really see it, but I know it needs to be smaller than that. Let's try 0.25 and let's hide the solid body. So maybe a little bit bigger, 0.3. That's probably okay. Then what we need to do is we need to move that thing into the right location. I don't need to see the image, but I need to take that body and I need to use move. This is where our analysis and our section view can come in handy because sometimes that can help us just see where this needs to be. That looks pretty good. I probably want to make sure it's forward a little bit more. So probably 2.51, and we'll say okay. So that is okay. However, part of the problem is I used the reference image for where that should be located, and I didn't really use any specific angular reference, right? So it's not actually in the right spot. So what I want to do is I'm just going to use move copy again. I'm going to select that body, and I'm just going to put it about where I think it needs to be. Now remember, I'm just doing this for visual reference. In reality, what we should do is project some references for where that thing needs to be, and then it'll be in the exact right location. This is really just, just for this specific reference. Now let's go ahead and use combine. Again, we're cutting. Target body is our rim or our hub. The tool body is that little sphere. We're going to say okay. Next, I'm going to add a small fillet to the edge. Let's say 0.05 again. That's what we've been using for everything. And now we want to create a circular pattern of that. So circular pattern. This time, if we're doing features, it's not going to work because we had a solid body that we moved into place. So we're going to use the face option. We're going to select that dimple. We're going to select that. Then for the axis, we need to select, again, a solid reference. We're going to grab the end of the rim. And then I need to increase the number of instances. Now, you'll notice that this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on there. So when we get to 8, they should be in about the right location, but you'll note that they're not. So this one needs to kind of be up. If I increase this to 10, which is half of that 20, then the references look right. So based on the numbers that we have, we kind of need to just figure out visually what looks right. Now 10 doesn't look right because we sort of have this thing going on. So what I want to do is I'm actually going to increase this to 20. And then I want to use the suppress option. The suppress option is going to allow me to pick ones that I don't want. And I don't want any that are near this. I don't want that. I don't want these two. I don't want the ones that are near the actual lug position. And I don't want that. So sometimes you might find that you need to use more instances and then suppress some of them to get the right look. All right, so we're pretty far in at this point. I think this is a great time for us to save, make sure that we don't lose any work. I'm going to bring everything back. I'm going to use Control-4 so that I take away those edges. Everything is looking great. I'm really happy with the results so far. And there's just a few more things that we need to do. But let's make sure that we save this. Don't want to lose any work. And of course, ask any questions and let me know if you have any trouble. But thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.